problematic at present. The first is the zebra mussel. They're originally from the Caspian and Black Sea. They were introduced to the Great Lakes, not on purpose, in 1988. We believe it most likely was from ballast tank water, like the picture I showed you. They reproduce at insane rates. I believe a single zebra mussel can produce up to 1 million offspring over the course of its life. So some of the things they do is they just latch on and grow onto any surface. Let me show you some pictures of what I'm talking about. This first picture, you can see they have actually latched on and completely covered motorboat blades. Here, not only non-living things, they have actually latched onto a poor little crayfish. That crayfish will most likely not survive. Here's how they do that. These little hairs are kind of what they use to latch onto all these surfaces. And I threw this last one in here because I thought this was pretty funny. A shoe that had been in one of the Great Lakes, left there for who knows how long, completely encrusted in zebra mussels. Okay, now you can imagine with these numbers how much food they consume. Okay, and that's, again, if they're consuming food, that means another native species is not getting what they need. Kudzu. Kudzu is sometimes called Japanese arrowroot. It was originally brought from Japan and southern China. It grows really fast, and when I show you the other pictures of it, I guarantee you guys have seen it all around Pittsburgh. The reason we brought it on purpose was to control soil erosion in the early 1900s because it grows so darn quickly. It was able to stabilize, soil and mountainsides. So it also looked attractive. Some people in the South in particular would actually plant it around their porches because they liked how it would grow up the side and look really pretty. However, it's nicknamed the plant that ate the South because eventually it just covered everything. When it grows over existing vegetation, it's going to kill it because it's going to get all the sunlight. The native plants are going to get none. It interferes with power lines. It just grows all over everything very, very quickly, and it's very hard to eradicate. Even if you continually rip it out, it just seems to come back. Let's look at these pictures. So kudzu growing over a parked car. This cabin is completely covered with it. And these are pictures like more of what you most likely have seen around Pittsburgh. As you can see, they can interfere very much with power lines. And that costs money to then have to go and remove that. The Burmese python, originally from the tropics of South and Southeast Asia, in the 1980s, people thought it was really cool to have an exotic pet like a Burmese python. But as I said earlier, once they got bigger, people couldn't handle them. So they, instead of destroying them, because people don't like to kill creatures usually, they released it into the Everglades. Now the Everglades are overrun with Burmese pythons, mainly because there's no natural predators. They are killing all the small mammals at alarming rates. They've obliterated something like 97% of the rabbit population is gone because of the Burmese pythons. We've actually hired hunters. The government there has hired hunters to kill as many Burmese pythons as they can. Even with doing that, having trained and very skilled hunters, they're still having trouble keeping their numbers in check. So Burmese python, as you can see, very, very large, very hard pet to kind of contain. They will eat anything, even an alligator. So their jaws unhinged, they can eat almost anything. And here are some eggs, about 40 of them, I believe, soon to be hatched. So this is one of those guys we were talking about that goes out and looks for pythons and or their eggs to destroy them. The Asian carp. The Asian carp is actually a few different species of carp, so they just kind of collectively call them the Asian carp, originally from Southeast Asia. They were brought to the U.S. in the 1970s for the purpose of cleaning aquatic farms. So basically, if you had a catfish farm and you wanted to keep the water clean, you'd throw some of these in there and they would actually naturally keep it clean. However, flooding caused these little fishery ponds to overflow. And all it took was a few carp to get into the Mississippi River to cause major, major issues. They're voracious feeders. They outcompete native species, and they become what we call a monoculture. Monoculture meaning a one-species culture. There are parts of the Mississippi River that have pretty much Asian carp and nothing else living in them. The interesting thing about these carp, they jump out of the water 8 to 10 feet, and these get very, very big. There have been cases of people's jaws being broken as they are riding on a boat and an Asian carp jumps out of the water. If they make it to the Great Lakes, we're very, very concerned that billions of dollars would be lost in fishing and the boating industries if these took over. And let me show you what I mean. This is a real picture, all of these are real pictures, of Asian carp jumping out of the water. So look at the numbers of these. I mean, it's astounding. The other thing, I always get students say, why don't we just fish and eat them? No one seems to want to eat carp. There's just not a market for it. They're very bony, so even the fillet has a whole bunch of bones in it. So unfortunately, that doesn't seem to be a way to kind of control their population. And like a lot of fish, they can get extremely large. So the video that I have of this, please make sure you check that out. Okay, the European, or sometimes called the common starling. Originally from Europe, this is a really funny way that it was introduced. It was brought to the US in the 1890s by people who loved Shakespeare. And they thought that all the birds that Shakespeare wrote about should be found on every continent. So they quite literally, and you can look this up, they released about 100 European starlings in Central Park, New York at that time. Now the population is over 200 million starlings in the United States. They push out all the native bird species, and they eat a lot of crops, crops that are meant for us or livestock, costing the agriculture industry $800 million a year. This is one example of a flock of starlings, and we are talking about thousands, hundreds of thousands in some cases of birds. Here's, again, just hanging out on the power lines. They've adapted to both, rural and suburban and urban environments. And here they are competing with a native species for some seeds. Okay, let's get those examples and our notes. The zebra mussel, kudzu, the Burmese python, and the Asian carp, and lastly, the European starling. Okay, so how can we prevent invasive species? This is your last bit of notes. Number 1, do not transport fruits, vegetables, plants, animals, anything when traveling. Because again, humans are the number 1 cause of invasive species. Number 2, cleaning boats and fishing equipment is something that we're trying to do more and more now. Number 3, do not release your pets into the wild. Even a goldfish is an invasive species. Lastly, how can we deal with existing invasive species? We're going to be talking about something called Integrated Pest Management, or IPM. It's a really interesting strategy because they focus on long-term prevention through a whole bunch of different techniques, like biological control, which is sometimes introducing a predator that will then eat the invasive species, habitat manipulation. So they're really trying to naturally, I guess as naturally as you can, fix this problem. And it's a really interesting career path, I think. Okay, guys, that's it for today. Watch those videos and submit a picture of your notes, and I will talk to you later.